Hola, IllumiGnati. First of all, I want to remind everyone that, man, it is so echoey in here right now. What is that about? It's driving me crazy. I might have to put my headphones on. Is that better? Is that better? Uh-oh. Do we have no audio? Oh, no. Let me see. Why do I not have audio? Give me just a second, guys. I got to see if this is really factual that I have no audio. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's my headphones. Perfect. All right, yeah, I had to put them on because the echo in here is obscene. So first of all, I want to remind you guys that if you have, if you pay up front for a year of Patreon services, you get a 20% discount. Plus, every year up to 3 years, you get another 5% off for a limited time only. And also, you know, we have good things on the horizon. The property in Malakatos is finally for sale. And of course, my share of that would completely liberate me from the restraints that I'm currently enduring. So, you know, I mean, it's such a crazy thing when I look back over my life and how much I took it for granted when there was plenty of resources. And, you know, rich too soon, wise too late. Is that the saying? It sounds like that's probably the saying. So anyways, the point is that, I mean, you guys know what I'm trying to do here. I feel like I have a voice that is missing in large part and needed. And so I feel almost obligated to try to amplify my, why does it say no data? Sorry, guys. I don't know if I've been hacked or what. Facebook has been sending all of my posts, and damn it, I wish there was someone in the chat because it's telling me no. Okay, there it goes. Sorry. Gosh. What just happened? Oh, the hot water heater. Sorry, you guys. We went on a massive hike today. I'm a little bit tired. There's been a lot of chaos. Like I said, Facebook has been sending all my posts and contacts to like everyone. I don't know what the hell's going on. So at any rate, yeah, that's where it's at. You know, it's like this whole project is kind of stuck due to just lack of funds, and it does seem like that could change pretty soon. But you know, nowish would be better. So I also want to remind you guys that I have a site chosen for this year's event. I'm thinking mid-July. It was going to be May, but of course, as you guys know, a lot of things went sideways on me. So, you know, now things feel pretty solid, and I'm trying to move forward with that. So same deal, if you're a patron, you get a discount, and depending on how long you've been a patron, that discount will increase. So, and you know, aside from just the promotional aspect and the need for resources and whatever in order to take this thing a little bit further, I've also been thinking a lot about, you know, how do I move forward? You know, I mean, I've been going through the occult and metaphysics and psychedelics and psychology and physics and all of this stuff for so long that, you know, sometimes it feels like, what else is there to say, you know? And the reality, I think, is that the understanding of how the universe works and our place in it is not really so complicated that, you know, it requires the kind of like multi-decade devotion to understand, maybe to master, but not necessarily to understand. You know, I was talking to someone earlier about how it's like when people like, who's Graham Hancock, you know, or Alex Jones even is a great example. He had legitimate shit to say in the beginning, but when these people run out of stuff to say that is real, they just start making shit up, you know, and that's what the majority of people that talk about the kind of stuff that I do, I think that, you know, at a certain point, it's like the only thing to do is to embrace the woo and kind of go off the rails on the woo-choo train, which, you know, I mean, that's not absolutely true. but it's something I've been giving thought to, what is next, how to move forward, how to lift up higher. And so, I think for me now, it's more about diet and discipline and willpower and channeling information into the right places at the right time, because if you want to rise above all the dirt and grime, add the right spice at the right time. And that's kind of the transition I feel like I'm undergoing, is from the fool to the magus. Because the fool destroys everything he creates, and I'm so guilty of that it's been hard to even continue existing sometimes, because it's a subconscious impulse to do that. When the programming is that early and that deep, it's very difficult, and I feel like I'm over it. So we're going to be seeing a lot of videos about like diet and discipline and the science of networking. These are things that I haven't really given much thought about, and I'm telling you guys this too, partly to inspire you to do the same. We're all in different places at our journeys. You guys are all a lot of different ages. Most of you are between 18 and 35, but there are a couple of boomers here in the Patreon. And I know I go after boomers a lot, but I think it should be understood that I mean like those boomers, not necessarily all of them. The ones that fit the description, So anyways, so I'm diving back deeply into the plant medicine and really trying to fill all of the blanks, so that there's no turn left unstoned, and really try to absolutely optimize all the investitures that I have made from all of these journeys over all of these years, so that over the next 1 to 2 years, I can really lay down some foundations and really start to build something meaningful. And I wouldn't have made it through this last 6-8 months, whatever it's been, without many of you, really all of you, but some of you in particular have really gone above and beyond to make sure that IllumiGnati can continue to illuminize. So enough ranting and rambling. By the way, due to sheer exhaustion, I think I might just do 30 minutes tonight. I said I was going to do an hour, but I think it's probably better for you guys too. Just cut it up. So I'll do an extra one tomorrow. So I'll go back into the Patreon and put part 1 and part 2, because they will definitely be linked. I didn't even notice that we had somehow fallen into the Night of the Brazen Serpent, which is an interesting name for a degree. References to the sun and Abraxas definitely are suggested very strongly. So we had been talking about how Plato and the Platonists, clothed with the images and words peculiar to the Kabbalists, described something similar to the descent of the soul of God, basically, into the materialization of the lower world. And also, if you look at it as a map of human psyche, it also is that. So they basically made another level macrocosm of that and said that, just as there are planets attributed to each of the Sephira in the Tree of Life, the soul transmigrates from planet to planet. That's why it's called the transmigration of the soul. The metempsychosis is a strange way of putting it, but it implies metamorphosis and insanity to some extent. So the Gnostics made souls ascend and descend through 8 heavens. In each of these were certain powers that were opposed to their return, and often drove them back to earth when not sufficiently purified. The last of those powers, nearest the luminous abode of the souls, was a serpent or dragon. And so this is what is meant when they say, do not bring an impure offering before the altar of the Most High. So, playing devil's advocate and assuming that these Platonists actually knew what they were talking about, that's really it. They're protecting the individual from, have you ever seen, I'm sure you guys have all seen the movie with the big fluffy dog dragon and, what the fuck, Never Ending Story. right? And you couldn't walk through the gates without getting zapped unless you were like totally fearless. And I should look up who wrote that movie, because that is a shamanic, understanding that if you can manage to have absolutely no fear, then nothing will harm you, because it is fear that draws the consequence to you. You are manifesting the possibility and therefore increasing the probability. In the ancient doctrine, certain genii were charged with the duty of conducting souls to the bodies destined to receive them, and of withdrawing them from those bodies. According to Plutarch, these were the functions of Proserpine and Mercury. In Plato, a familiar genius accompanies man at his birth, follows and watches him all his life, and at death conducts him to the tribunal of the great judge. These genii are the media of communication between man and gods, and the soul is ever in their presence. This doctrine is taught in the oracles of Zoroaster, and these genii were the intelligences that resided in planets. And of course, there's many ways to look at this. This individual genie is also just the highest self. And if time is not linear, then your future self already exists. And it could be even that there's sort of a dualistic existence, right? Because physicists have determined that there can be one object in two places. It's not two objects. So that implies that a human could be in the future and in the past. And so in this current incarnation, we're more or less of the lower order. Everyone has these two voices that argue. Sometimes you follow the higher, sometimes you fall into the lower. And so the way to think about this in purely psychological terms is that what they're actually talking about is that there's the part of your mind that always knows what you should do, that always counsels you with the best advice. And, inevitably, most people, including myself to a large extent, fail to adhere to the counsel of the higher mind, even though you're shown time and time and time again that that is the correct course of action. And of course, the reasons for this are multitude. So, the exact details of it must be worked out by the individual. The thing is, the tools that allow that deconstruction and reconfiguration are the same for everyone, more or less. So, psychedelics, meditation, yoga, flow state, all of these things, it doesn't matter which peculiarities, idiosyncrasies you are dealing with, these things are still the answer in some form or fashion. And you could say, well, I took LSD, it didn't help me at all. Well, maybe you need mushrooms. But still, somehow, psychedelics are going to apply to you, And then there was one other thing. Okay, so these, according to Plutarch, these were the functions of Proserpine and Mercury. Okay, now Mercury is pretty much the most important symbol in the entirety of the arcanum of the Western mystery tradition. So the idea of turning lead into gold is not quite correct. It's actually the mercury, and the lead is just sort of the base thing that's sort of a medium. And so, I say this all the time because it's so amazing, but if you knock a proton off of mercury, it becomes gold. And so the sun is the one, it is the center, it is God, basically, in this microcosm. So the idea of mercury creating a passageway or rejecting when you're at that last phase, entering back into source, right? Not purified enough, bounced back out into the universe, back to Earth, back to Pluto, if you're Hitler or something. So, anyways, the really interesting part about this, though, is that we have Thoth, Mercury, we have the Hermes Trismegistus, who is also basically Mercury, all acting as a psychopomp. And then we have motes of liquid mercury around the caskets, I guess. They're not, the burial chambers of both Nahuatl or Incan, or I'm sorry, Aztec, like offshoot tribe did this, and also some of the Egyptians did this. So the strange thing about that is that we have this metal that, just as the planet is almost, it's right next to the sun, the source, we have a metal that has somehow come to be called mercury that becomes gold. It's the closest thing to the sun. And then on top of that, we have psychopomps in Greece, or at least one called Mercury, and ferries people across the moat of Mercury into the sun. So understanding those connections and how there is apparently no causal or rational or logical way to tie them together, it's not really possible to dismiss that as coincidence. And so what it actually is one of the most powerful insights I think we're capable of having into the protocol for decoding and understanding the universe. All that is metaphor. Thus, the secret science and mysterious emblems of initiation were connected with the heavens, the spheres, and the constellations. And this connection must be studied by whomever would understand the ancient mind and be able to interpret the allegories and explore the meaning of the symbols in which the old sages endeavored to delineate the ideas that struggled within them for utterance and could be but insufficiently and inadequately expressed by language, whose words are images of those things alone that can be grasped by and are within the empire of the senses. It is not possible for us thoroughly to appreciate the feelings with which the ancients regarded the heavenly bodies and the ideas to which their observations of the heavens gave rise, because we cannot put ourselves in their place. Look at the stars with their eyes in the world's youth, and divest ourselves of the knowledge which even the commonest of us have, that makes us regard the stars and planets and all the universe of suns and worlds as a mere inanimate machine, an aggregate of senseless orbs, no more astonishing, except in degree, than a clock or an orrery. We wonder and are amazed at the power and wisdom. To most men, it seems only a kind of infinite ingenuity of the Maker. They wondered at the work and endowed it with life and force and mysterious powers and mighty influences. Memphis in Egypt was in latitude 29 degrees 5 north and in longitude 30 degrees 18 east. Thebes in Upper Egypt, latitude 23 degrees by 43 north and longitude 32 degrees 43 east. I have no idea why he's giving these coordinates. I feel like there is something, probably thinly veiled there that I'll have to spend some time trying to decode, but I'm not getting it right off the bat. Through Egypt ran the great river Nile, coming from beyond Ethiopia, its source in regions wholly unknown in the abodes of heat and fire, and its course from south to north. Its inundations had formed the alluvial lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, which they continued to raise higher and higher and to fertilize by their deposits. At first, as in all newly settled countries, those inundations, occurring annually and always at the same period of the year, were calamities, until, by means of levees and drains and artificial lakes for irrigation, they became blessings, and were looked for with joyful anticipation, as they had before been awaited with terror. Upon the deposit left by the sacred river, as it withdrew into its banks, the husbandman sowed his seed, and the rich soil and genial sun ensured him of an abundant harvest. Babylon lay on the Euphrates, which ran from southeast to northwest, blessing, as all rivers do, the arid country through which it flowed, but its rapid and uncertain overflows brought terror and disaster. To the ancients, as yet inventors of no astronomical instruments and looking at the heavens with the eyes of children, this earth was a level plain of unknown extent. About its boundaries there was speculation, but no knowledge. The inequalities of its surface were the irregularities of a plain. That it was a globe, or that anything lived on its undersurface, or on what it rested, they had no idea. Every 24 hours the sun came up from beyond the eastern rim of the world and traveled across the sky, over the earth, always south of, but sometimes nearer and sometimes further from the point overhead, and sunk below the world's western rim. With him went light. After him followed darkness. And every 24 hours appeared in the heavens under another body, visible chiefly at night, but sometimes even when the sun shone, which likewise, as if following the sun at a greater or less distance, traveled across the sky. There comes a Redeemer, and he, what is that Grateful Dead song? There comes a Redeemer, and he slowly too fades away. There follows a wagon behind him that's loaded with clay. Right, the moon, the sun pulling the moon. A wagon full of clay. Where are we here? Oh, yeah. Traveled across the sky. Sometimes it appeared as a thin crescent, and thence increasing to a full orb resplendent with silver light. And sometimes more and sometimes less to the southward of the point overhead, within the same limits as the sun. Man enveloped by the thick darkness and profoundest night, when everything around him has disappeared, and he seems alone with himself, and the black shades that surround him feels his existence as a blank nothingness, except so far as memory recalls to him the glories and splendors of light. Everything is dead to him, and he, as it were, to nature. How crushing and overwhelming the thought, the fear, the dread, that perhaps the darkness may be eternal, and that day may possibly never return. If it ever occurs to his mind, while the solid gloom closes up against him like a wall, what then can restore him to energy, to activity, to fellowship, and communion with the great world which God has spread around him, and which perhaps in the darkness may be passing away? Light restores him to himself and to nature which seemed lost to him. Naturally, therefore, the primitive men regarded light as the principle of their real existence, without which life would be but one continued weariness and despair. This necessity for light and its actual creative energy were felt by all men, and nothing was more alarming to them than its absence. It became their first divinity, a single ray of which, flashing into the dark, tumultuous bosom of chaos, caused man and all the universe to emerge from it. So all the poets sung who imagined cosmogonies, such as the first dogma of Orpheus, Moses, and the theologians. Light was Ormuzd, adored by the Persians, and darkness, Ahriman, origin of all evils. Light was the life of the universe, the friend of man, the substance of God and of the soul, which is correct, I think. The sky was to them a great solid concave arch, a hemisphere of unknown material at an unknown distance above the flat level earth, and along it journeyed in their courses the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars. The sun was to them a great globe of fire, of unknown dimensions, at an unknown distance. The moon was a mass of softer light, the stars and planets lucent bodies, armed with unknown and supernatural influences. It could not fail to be soon observed that at regular intervals the days and nights were equal, and that two of these intervals measured the same space of time as elapsed between the successive inundations, and between the returns of springtime and harvest. Nor could it fail to be perceived that the changes of the moon occurred regularly, the same number of days always elapsing between the first appearance of her silver crescent in the west at evening, and that of her full orb rising in the east at the same hour, and the same again between that and the new appearance of the crescent in the west. It was also soon observed that the sun crossed the heavens in a different line each day, the days being longest and the nights shortest when the line of his passage was furthest north, and the days shortest and nights longest when that line was furthest south. That his progress north and south was perfectly regular, marking 4 periods that were always the same. Those when the days and nights were equal were the vernal and autumnal equinoxes, and that when the days were longest, or the summer solstice, and that when they were shortest, the winter solstice. With the vernal equinox, on or about 25th of March of our calendar, we found that there unerringly came soft winds, the return of warmth, caused by the sun turning back to the north from the middle ground of his course, the vegetation of the new year, and the impulse to amatory, like, doing it, action on the part of the animal creation. Then the bull and the ram, animals most valuable to the agriculturist, and symbols themselves of vigorous generative power, recovered their vigor. The birds mated and built nests, the seeds germinated and grass grew, the trees put forth leaves. With the summer solstice, when the sun reached the extreme northern limit of his course, came great heat and burning winds and lassitude and exhaustion. Then vegetation withered. Man longed for the cool breezes of spring and autumn, and the cool water of the wintry Nile or Euphrates, and the lion sought for that element far from his home in the desert. With the autumnal equinox came ripe harvests and fruits of the tree and vine, falling leaves and cold evenings presaging wintry frosts, and the principle of powers and darkness, prevailing over those of light, drove the sun further to the south, so that the nights grew longer than the days. And at the winter solstice the earth was wrinkled with frost, the trees were leafless, and the sun, reaching the most southern point in his career, seemed to hesitate whether to continue descending, to leave the world to darkness and despair, or to turn upon his steps and retrace his course to the northward, bringing back seed time and spring, and green leaves and flowers, and all the delights of love. Thus, naturally and necessarily, time was divided first into days and then into moons or months, and years. And with these divisions and the movements of the heavenly bodies that marked them were associated and connected to all men's physical enjoyment and privations. Wholly agricultural, and in their frail habitations greatly at the mercy of the elements and the changing seasons, the primitive people of the Orient were most deeply interested in the recurrence of the periodical phenomena presented by the two great luminaries of heaven, on whose regularity all their prosperity depended. And the attentive observer soon noticed that the smaller lights of heaven were apparently even more regular than the sun and moon, and foretold with unerring certainty by their risings and settings the periods of recurrence of the different phenomena and seasons on which the physical well-being of all men depended. They soon felt the necessity of distinguishing the individual stars or groups of stars and giving them names, that they might understand each other when referring to and designating them. Necessity produced designations at once natural and artificial. Observing that in the cycle of the year, the renewal and periodical appearance of the productions of the earth were constantly associated, not only with the courses of the sun, but also with the rising and setting of certain stars, and with their position relative to the sun, the center to which they referred the whole starry host. The mind naturally connected the celestial and terrestrial objects that were in fact connected, and they commenced by giving to particular stars or groups of stars the names of those terrestrial objects which seemed connected to them. And for those which still remained unnamed by this nomenclature, they, to complete a system, assumed arbitrary names. Thus, the Ethiopian or Thebes or Saba styled those stars under which the Nile commenced to overflow stars of inundation, or that poured out water, Aquarius. So this is where we get astrology, in case you guys are wondering what this long-winded, I know it's kind of a lot of setup, but the man's making a point here. Those stars among which the sun was, when he had reached the northern tropic and began to retreat southward, were termed from his retrograde motion the crab. As he approached in autumn, the middle point between the northern and southern extremes of his journeying, the days and nights became equal, and the stars among them, which he was then found, were called stars of the balance, Libra. Those stars among which the sun was, when the lion, driven from the desert by thirst, came to slake it at the Nile, were called stars of the lion, Leo. Those among which the sun was at harvest were called those of the gleaning virgin, holding a sheaf of wheat, Virgo. Those among which he was found in February, when the ewes brought forth their young, were called stars of the lamb, Aries. Thus in March, when it was time to plow, were called stars of the ox, Taurus. Those under which hot and burning winds came from the desert, venomous like poisonous reptiles, were called stars of the scorpion, Scorpio. Observing that the annual return of the rising of the Nile was always accompanied by the appearance of a beautiful star, which at that period showed itself in the direction of the sources of that river, and seemed to warn the farmer to be careful not to be surprised by the inundation. The Ethiopian compared this act of that star to that of the animal, which by barking gives warning of danger, and styled it Sirius. Thus commencing, and as astronomy came to be more studied, imaginary figures were traced all over the heavens to which the different stars were assigned. Chief among them were those that lay along the path which the sun traveled as he climbed toward the north and descended to the south. lying within certain limits and extending to an equal distance on each side of the line of equal nights and days. This belt, curving like a serpent, was termed the zodiac and divided into 12 signs. At the vernal equinox, 2,455 years before our era, the sun was entering the sign and constellation Taurus, or the bull, having passed through since he commenced at the winter solstice to ascend northward, the signs Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries. On entering the first of which, he reached the lowest limit of his southward journey. From Taurus, he passed through Gemini and Cancer and reached Leo when he arrived at the terminus of his journey northward. Thence, through Leo, Virgo, and Libra, he entered Scorpio at the autumnal equinox and journeyed southward through Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricornus to Aquarius, the terminus of his journey south. The path by which he journeyed through these signs became the ecliptic, and that which passes through the two equinoxes the equator. They knew nothing of the immutable laws of nature, and whenever the sun commenced to tend southward, they feared lest he might continue to do so, and by degrees disappear forever, leaving the earth to be ruled forever by darkness, storm, and cold. Hence they rejoiced when he commenced to reascend after the winter solstice, struggling against the malign influences of Aquarius and Pisces, and amicably received by the Lamb. And when at the vernal equinox he entered Taurus, they still more rejoiced at the assurance that the days would again be longer than the nights, and the season of seed time had come, the summer and harvest would follow. And so, the reason this matters, there are numerous reasons why this matters, but the reason why this matters particularly, is that you can kind of see how the church intervened and disrupted the continuity of the being of the individual human and nature. And so this relationship with all of these stars and constellations were inextricably intertwined with our survival, and it helped us maintain a connection to the greater processes that are afoot in the world. And you would think that this, where the constellations and why, that's something that would be significant enough to be taught in school. However, I don't think that was ever the case. Speaking of the church, hence they rejoiced when he commenced to reascend after the winter solstice, struggling against the malign influence of Aquarius and Pisces, and amicably received by the Lamb. So that's where we get the idea of the Lamb as Savior. And it's also the reason why they demonize the Aquarian type thinkers, the people that are connected to intuition and the feminine and the mystery. You see where I'm going with this. And what was the other sign that was doing all the evil in the wintertime? Aquarius and Aquarius and Pisces. Did we get an explanation of where Pisces came from? I don't recall off the top of my head. No. Curious how that came to be. Amicably received by the Lamb. And when at the vernal equinox he entered Taurus, they still more rejoiced at the assurance that the days would again be longer than the nights, that the season of seed time had come, and the summer and harvest would follow. And they lamented when, after the autumnal equinox, the malign influence of the venomous scorpion and vindictive archer and the filthy and ill-omened he-goat dragged him down again towards the winter solstice. Arriving there, they said he had been slain and had gone to the realm of darkness. Remaining there for 3 days. Oh, man. He rose again, and again ascended northward to the heavens to redeem the earth from the gloom and darkness of winter, which soon became emblematic of sin and evil and suffering, as the spring, summer, and autumn became emblems of happiness and immortality. Soon, they personified the sun and worshipped him under the name of Osiris, and transmuted the legend of his descent among the winter signs into a fable of his death, his descent into the infernal regions, and his resurrection. The moon became Isis, the wife of Osiris. The winter, as well as the desert or the ocean into which the sun descended, became Typhon, the spirit or principle of evil, or Satan, Saturn, warring against the destroying Osiris. That is a perfect place for us to chill for a minute, I think. Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Yo, yo, yo. Yo, we're gonna, we run this. All right, so, yeah, I mean, and it's funny because most of the initiates still at that point are still basically Christian, and then all of a sudden they're like, guess what? Sorry about your luck, bud, but you placed your faith in an imaginary fucking giggity. Giggity, giggity. I don't know why my face is frozen. Is it frozen in the... Here, let's see. Put it there. And put it back here. There you go, bitches. Whew. All right. So, obviously that's where Jesus came from, but that's probably not news to any of you guys. But that was pretty enlightening. I wasn't aware of how the constellations got the name, and I've read this book before. I must have just not. I think my attitude toward it is like, oh, he's talking about astrology. I don't even want to hear about this shit, And it's not that I don't think that you can, pattern recognition is what allows precognition. So seeing the patterns and their ratios, the arc of their connection with the real world events, I'm sure it's possible to, uncover quite a lot. The contention that I have is that every culture that has astrology has different interpretations of things, and that doesn't necessarily negate the systems, because everything contains its contradiction. So you don't have a quarter in your hand on the head side and say, well, if you turn it over and there's an eagle or whatever it is on the other side, it's not a quarter. So, but still, there are a number of different astrological systems, and none of them tend to agree on a single point. So, the jury's still out for me. Not as to whether or not it's real, but as to whether or not anybody actually knows how to read it. I mean, I think if there were people that had been alive for like 2,500 years, maybe, and they spent a lot of time paying attention to the position of the stars and what was going on in the world. One thing I will say, though, is that every Mercury retrograde, possibly because I'm a hermetic or not, a mercurial archetype, shit goes batshit crazy and sideways, and it's, it's gotten to the point actually where I'll actually say it like, it's got to be Mercury retrograde, and every time so far that I've come to that conclusion, it has turned out to be true. So, so I will do this probably in the middle of the day tomorrow. Maybe like 3 o'clock, I'll do a part 2. So thank you guys so much for your patronage, and if you know anybody that is in the market for 1 hectare organic farm in Malacatos, Ecuador, and has, $250,000 to drop, please shoot me an email. It would be an absolute miracle to get this finished and done. I can get back to playing in a band and making music, and that's probably what I should have been doing all along. So